"You don't belong here," Derek breathed, close enough that I felt the heat of his breath on my cheek. His words sliced through Bing Crosby and the clink of crystal like a carving knife. Honey-baked ham steamed, cinnamon and pine swirled, and my cheeks burned. Emily stared at her plate, her wedding ring catching the tree lights, not me. I folded my napkin and tasted copper, but I said nothing. Snow ticked at the windows of their suburban New Jersey colonial, and his smile waited for me to break. 67 years teach you when silence is a shield and not a surrender. A ribbon of gravy slid off the spoon. The radiator hissed. I swallowed pride. The kids' paper crowns crackled. My own name felt foreign in my throat. Derek's jaw flexed around a smirk, eyes daring me to defend my place. "Mom," Emily whispered, then let her voice fall into the mashed potatoes. I pinched the St. Christopher medal in my purse and held my line. Then the doorbell chimed, and Mr. Kaplan stepped in, his wool hat dusted with snow. We gathered by the fireplace as he unfolded my late husband's will. But then the will was read, and the room shifted on its axis. "This house, the accounts, and the company pass solely to Margaret," he said. "Any resident who disrespects her right to be here forfeits residence within 30 days. Derek's fork clattered. Emily's eyes found mine. I finally took a slow sip of water. "You want to know how a Christmas dinner turned into a reckoning like that? How a quiet widow learned to let paper speak when her voice shook. I'll take you back to the promises, the power plays, and the last goodbye. If you believe respect at the table isn't granted by bullies, stay with me. Subscribe to hear the whole story and others who refuse to be pushed out. Sometimes the loudest answer is the one you save for the end." The clink of Derek's fork still rang in the quiet when I set my glass back down. My name in Mr. Kaplan's voice, a steady, printed thing, not the soft Maggie Tom used to hum from the kitchen, hung in the air like the angel we forgot to straighten on the tree. My daughter's eyes, warm brown like her father's, finally lifted and met mine. For a heartbeat, I saw her at 9 years old, scabbed knees swinging under a church basement folding chair, asking if we could hang one more paper snowflake before we went home. I'm Margaret Donnelly, 67, and I have lived in this house long enough to know which radiator hisses first when the heat kicks on, and where the floorboard near the back door creaks if you step with your heel before your toe. I know the way Bing Crosby sounds different depending on the speaker, and where pine sap has stained the porch rail from all the years we used to lean the tree against it while we shook off the netting. I know how to make gravy that doesn't break, and how to keep my voice whole when someone would prefer it shattered. Derek is my son-in-law. Crisp shirt sleeves always rolled just so. A smile that sits on his face like a folded napkin you're not sure you should use. He calls our kitchen dated, my lace curtains busy, and the stories I tell about Tom's first service calls quaint. He was the one who brought that Bluetooth speaker that made Bing Crosby sound like he'd swallowed a tin can, and the one who told the kids to take off the paper crowns because we're having a nice dinner, right before the line on Mr. Kaplan's page turned our nice dinner into a table we all had to set our hands on and steady. A long time ago, before we had radiators to hiss or paper crowns to smooth, we had a one-bedroom in Elizabeth and a coffee can under the sink where I kept a set of keys on a blue Donnelly heating ring and enough quarters for laundry. It smelled like old varnish and someone else's cooking in the hall. The first winter we were married, Tom would shake maybe $5 out of his wallet on a Friday and say, "Hun, we'll get by." Sometimes get by meant ShopRite rotisserie one night and egg sandwiches the next. Sometimes it meant I pulled the bottom of the pot roast with 2 forks on Sunday and turned it into Monday's soup. We built the company from calls that came through a secondhand switchboard in our living room. The first time the pipe burst in a colonial over on Summit Avenue, Tom's hands came home raw and pink from the cold, and I warmed them on my neck until he fell asleep upright on the couch with his boots off. I learned to answer the phone with a smile in my voice at all hours. "Donnelly Heating, this is Margaret." And to write down addresses even when the handwriting of the man on the other end shook with panic. For years I wore pencil shavings on my sweater like lint and could tell by one quick glance at ledgers spread across the coffee table whether we could afford to switch from generic coffee to Maxwell House that week. I measured our life in fuel oil deliveries, W-2s, and the number of times Tom's truck backed out before dawn, the little exhaust puff like a cloud that kissed the maple tree and disappeared. And we measured it in Emily, my girl who used to sit at the end of the couch with her homework and kick her heels against the cushions when she had her spelling words in a neat line by bedtime. We made the front room her recital hall once a year, pushed the furniture to the walls, and watched her bow her little violin while our neighbor, Mrs. Russo, held plates of cookies and cried like she was at Carnegie Hall. I learned to make her Halloween costumes with a pattern I traced myself from a newspaper because the store-bought ones were too expensive, and she never knew at the time that I sold my mother's small pearl earrings to float payroll one bad February. Tom never forgot. He pressed a slip of paper into my palm a year later with the same amount written on it and a little heart for the comma, and he still wore a look like awe when I told him, "It's our life, Tom. Not mine, not yours, ours. Some sacrifices loom large, and some are so small they'd be invisible except you can feel where they wore your palms smooth." I turned down a clerk job with benefits at the hospital because our men needed someone they knew to hand them checks on Friday with a smile and a, "How's your mom, Jimmy?" I cooked for 6 at 2 in the morning when a crew got back from a long job and they were too proud to say they were hungry. I let other women's names be stitched in on the holiday cards that came addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Donnelly, when I knew I was the one who'd stayed up with the ledger and the coffee while Tom was out in the snow. I didn't mind. I minded later only when someone who hadn't been there declared our effort outdated. I met Derek at Emily's graduation picnic on our lawn in May, the blue jay singing greedy and loud in the oak. He had a firm handshake and a way of standing like his jacket had been tailored around a decision no one else had been invited to hear. He made her laugh. He carried folding chairs the way one might carry a brief victory. They got married on a sticky August day, and I sewed little crystals into the hem of her dress for luck. He told me he liked his meat rare, his investments aggressive, and his options open. I imagined he meant restaurants and retirement plans. I did not consider that he might mean people. I don't like to throw around big words. I grew up in a house where you said what you meant, but gently, and where my mother pressed a St. Christopher into my hand the day I took the bus alone to Newark for a secretarial course and said, "He keeps travelers safe if you hold him." I do not use contempt unless I have turned the word over and found it smooth on both sides. With Derek, it started in small drafts. He was good at little breezes, moving the end table a bit so my tea didn't sit on my left anymore, asking if he could take a look at my spice cupboard and then putting the cinnamon sticks in a jar labeled C for clove, as if my kitchen were a test he was marking. He hated my junk, a word he applied to the good cut glass bowl Tom's mother had sent over from County Clare, and to the quilt squares my own grandmother had pieced from dresses she'd made out of flour sacks. He made jokes with Mom tucked into them as if it were a brick. "Careful, Mom. We don't want to trip over this. You know, Mom, open-concept kitchens are safer for your age." When Tom got sick, the kind of sick that makes you look at the calendar like it's slipping softly away from its nail, we spent hours at Overlook in Summit. The infusion suite had kind nurses and coffee that tasted like intention. I kept crackers in my purse and a pen in my hand. Tom had always been the one to fix what was broken, to swing a wrench until a thing hummed. Sitting still in those chairs, he turned parts of his strength over to me without saying so, and I stored them. Every look, every squeeze of his hand, like firewood stacked neat for winter. He said he didn't want Emily to uproot her kids from good schools or her job. He didn't want me alone rattling around a big house. "We'll make it work," he said. And by we, he meant me and the plans he had the strength to set in motion. He met with Mr. Kaplan, who had been our friend since he and Tom shared a corner at the Knights of Columbus brunch so many years ago, and got to talking baseball. There was quiet paper, and there were signatures, and Tom's eyes were clear and gentle the day he asked me to bring my St. Christopher out of my jewelry box and tuck him into my purse. "For when you go places you don't know yet," he said, "for the roads ahead." I told him I'd keep our house a place of peace, and he closed his eyes and breathed like he could hear the radiator at home hissing into life. After the funeral, the house gave me my married name, back in the same way an old coat gives you your shape when you put it on. I made coffee in the mister. Coffee machine we got on our 40th Christmas, fed seed to the cardinals who have come every year, and wrote Emily's lunches on sticky notes before I put them in the paper sacks. Don't forget your math test the first day. Proud of you. The week she gave a presentation I knew had kept her up. Derek moved them aside and placed his own typed checklists near the door. Drop kids, conference call, contractor estimate 2 p.m. As if my notes were small leaves to be swept away. He set up his laptop at the island and called a plumber who wasn't one of ours to look at a faucet that just needed a new washer. He turned the heat down to 68 because that's what his smart thermostat at their old apartment had been set to. And when I raised it back to 72 because my hands ache in the cold, he thumbed the button down again and said, "Margaret, we have to think about the bill." We had thought about the bill for 45 years. I had sold those pearls and my wedding china, one piece at a time, on a day when we had to make payroll and the check from a big commercial job was processing. I shouldered November after November, counting oil deliveries like a rosary. When Derek lost a job 3 years ago, he sat at our table with his wristwatch catching the light and said he just needed a couple months to figure out my pivot. Tom asked him to come into the shop for a while, learn the books, maybe ride with the guys to see what it takes to unfreeze a restaurant's line at 3 a.m. Derek lasted exactly 4 days of riding along before the hours cramped his jaw. He fumbled deposit slips, bristled when our receptionist called him Sweetie, and announced that what we really needed was branding. He had grand ideas for a new logo, a slick repackaging, a social media push with drone footage of vans, and he could not remember the name of the man who'd been with us 20 years and whose wife had knitted his newborn a hat. Still, I didn't say much. Emily loved him. He loved her in a way that made her feel wrapped up. He made grilled cheese for the kids and folded laundry while he talked to his mother on the phone. I wanted to believe there was enough goodness there to buoy us through what I chalked up to youth and a different upbringing. But this fall, he turned that goodness into a kind of capital he withdrew and spent when it suited him. October sun pierced the leaves in sheets of gold, and I found the bins from our attic labeled Christmas Front Room. The kids, Sophie and Liam, had dragged them down with the kind of joy that made the dust shimmer. Derek cut the tape with his car keys before I could get the scissors and laid our ornaments out on towels like evidence. He picked up the filigreed star Tom and I bought the first year we could afford something nicer than tin, turned it in the light, and set it aside. "This is sentimental," he said. "But this year we're going with a cleaner look, all white lights, all metallics." Emily saw a thing on Instagram and, "Mom, don't you think minimal is calmer for you?" I sat at the edge of the living room rug, the same rug where Tom and I danced slow with our socks on one New Year's Eve, because we were too tired to go out and too grateful not to dance anyway, and I folded the tissue back over the star. In my lap, my hands looked like versions of my mother's, veins like rivers on a map, knuckles that know how to knead but prefer you not call them knobby. "We have traditions," I said quietly. "The kids take turns with the star. Your mother may have had metallics. My mother hung tinsel like rain. There's room for your things and mine." He smiled a smaller smile. "We'll see." That's what he said when he invited a contractor to measure our kitchen for an island that would have pushed Tom's table into a corner. "We'll see." When he set aside my mixing bowl because it was chipped, a chip that told a story about the Thanksgiving, I dropped it and caught it with my foot, kept the stuffing from the floor, and laughed until I cried. "We'll see." When he told me the house was too big for me alone, and that the stairs would be the death of me, and that downsizing to a townhouse they'd found near his barber just made sense. He said it kindly. He said it like a man who believes he knows the right way to fold a sheet so that it doesn't wrinkle. It didn't matter. The effect was the same, my life made into laundry, folded by hands that didn't know the smell of our soap. Do you know why I asked Mr. Kaplan to bring the will over tonight? Because I had been told 3 times this month, with 3 different intonations, that I did not belong where I have belonged since I was 22. Once in this kitchen, 2 days after I found glitter in my shoe from a school craft I had helped Sophie with, when Derek leaned against the counter and said, "It's not that we don't want you here, Margaret. We just want the kids to have room. We have plans." Once in the foyer, at the small table where Tom kept the bowl for keys, when the bowl was not there and I held my empty hand in a way I didn't recognize, and Derek said, "We need to declutter this." Once tonight, his face close enough that I could feel the warmth of his words against my cheek, in front of my child, who was wrestling with not wanting to upset the man she loved and not wanting to betray the woman who raised her. I did not want to make Emily choose between a line in the air and a home that is built like a line drawn in brick and heat. I wanted it there in writing, to take the brunt of the logic off her shoulders. Mr. Kaplan cleared his throat. The Christmas lights hummed. I could hear the sleet hitting the window, a soft hush that sounded like a mother soothing a child. The kids looked at the adults the way children look at weather, and I smiled at them. My best version of a lighthouse. "It means you're safe," is what a lighthouse says, without raising its voice. Derek's jaw moved, and he laughed, short and quiet, like it might be a different song altogether. We should talk to someone," he said finally, as if Mr. Kaplan weren't someone. By the end, he was not working full-time. I'm not saying he wasn't himself. I'm just saying it seems your father was sharp as a nail until his last day, Emily said, surprising herself, I think. Her voice, when she wants it to be, is a bell. Her cheeks were blotched pink. She looked at me like a woman looks at another woman with a lot of years and a lot of winters between them. "Mom, why didn't you tell me he did this?" "Because I didn't want to make you choose between telling your husband to be kinder and feeling like I was putting you in the middle," I said. "And because paper doesn't flinch." I reached into my purse and found St. Christopher. I ran my thumb along his edges and felt the years sit up in my chest, straight and strong. Your father wanted me to be safe. He wanted us all to be safe. Derek placed his fork back down carefully this time. He'd never been good at the pause. He prefers momentum, the slide. "So this is about respect," he said, as if the word were new on his tongue. "We have always respected you." I thought about the day he called Goodwill and scheduled a pickup without asking me, and I hurried to the porch while the man carried out my hope chest, the one Tom built with his own hands one winter, and I said, "I'm so sorry, that's not for donation." And the man, a sweet kid with a Rutgers hat, looked at Derek, and Derek looked at the clock. "I'll handle it," he'd said then, like I was a broken faucet. He canceled the pickup. He patted my arm. "I didn't know it meant something." "It's not a punishment," I said tonight, "but we have a rule now, a rule your father wanted. Anyone who lives here treats this home and the people in it with respect. If they cannot, they find a place that suits them better." Derek leaned back. He desperately wanted, a different table, a different room, a different way this had been served to him. He looked at Emily with his eyebrows raised in that way that asks for an ally without using words, and she took her napkin and folded it once, twice. She set it down. Our girl, who has always tried to be Italy in a room full of countries, making deals, arranging seating charts in her mind that will turn mouths into smiles, looked at him and then at me. "Let's have dessert," she said, eyes shining with a complicated wet. "Mom, you made pecan pie." I did. With the recipe card that has butter stains in the corner and Tom's note in the margin that says, "More nuts, less corn syrup," because he liked to chew it like a story. I cut the pie with the knife we got at our wedding from my Aunt Ruth, the one with the mother-of-pearl handle. I held plates out and watched my granddaughter count the stars on the napkins. I watched my grandson dip his finger in the whipped cream and lick it clean, and then look to see if anyone would tell him not to. I whispered, "Your grandpa did that too." And Liam grinned and said, "He did?" A tiny question mark at the end of all our sentences grew gentler. After dessert, Mr. Kaplan zipped his coat and stood in the door a minute with his hat in his hand, like men do in old movies when the scene isn't done, but their part is. He squeezed my shoulder, looked at Emily in a way that said, "Call me," and nodded to Derek with a courtesy that was not pretend. "The clause is legal," he said. It's firm, and it's not about a trap, it's about peace. I'll have our own counsel look at it, Derek said. And there was no heat in his voice now, just the kind of tidy cool you feel when the temperature drops and a snowflake lands perfectly on your glove. Of course, he is an of course man. He was born with one in his pocket. He uses them like tissues. You can if you need to. When the front door closed and quiet came in like a friend, Emily stood at the sink with her mouth soft, and I took 2 forks and scraped pie crust off the pan. And we ate it standing there, shoulder to shoulder. I didn't know about the company, she said. I thought it was called Donnelly, but I guess I thought it would... It's called Donnelly because your dad thought it sounded good on a truck, I said. And we both laughed, the kind that lets something inside you sit down and rest. It's ours because I spent enough nights with a shoebox full of receipts to earn a piece of it, and because your dad wanted me to have the kind of protection he couldn't give me with his body anymore. I rinsed my fork and watched the water run clear. If you and the kids want to stay, you can. If Derek wants to, he can. But it comes with a cost, and the cost is simple. Kindness. I don't think Derek slept that night. He was pacing the hall when I went to the bathroom at 2:30, a glass of water in his hand that he did not drink. He called a friend on the coast at a time that made sense for them, whispered into the phone about revisions and options and fairness and optics, and I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at Tom in the wedding photo on the dresser. He was 23, hair a little too long over his collar, tie too wide like men wore them then. He had the same look when he was 65, the one that told me he liked the way I looked in that dress and also liked the way I made a budget fit in a thin envelope. I lifted our picture frame and kissed the glass. It's silly, maybe, but if you've ever held a hand so long, you can still feel the imprint of it when you let go. You'll know a kiss can be a thank you as much as an ache. In the morning, I did what I've always done. I fed the birds, who came to the feeder like red and brown ornaments the wind knew how to move. I made coffee. I called the shop and asked Jose how the boilers looked on Cranford Avenue. Cold tonight, he said, and I reminded him to test the relief valve on the old Weil McLean in the White House with the broken shutter. He chuckled. Mrs. Donnelly, you still know them. We raised half those boilers, I said, and he laughed like men laugh when they know you've been in the trenches with them and you still care. Derek emerged from the guest room, my old sewing room, fresh and shaved, the kind of ready that can be mistaken for stability. Good morning, he said. He made the word warm, and I mirrored it back. He kissed the top of Sophie's head and told Liam to zip up because the cold has teeth. He looked at me like a man looks at a door he cannot tell if it swings in or out. We'll talk tonight, he said. I'll be here, I said, and I poured him coffee without asking if he wanted it, because people don't always know what they want, and sometimes it helps to hand them a cup you've poured 100 times. He took it, and he said, thanks, like a word that had to find its way out from between stones. He told the kids they could wear their paper crowns again if they wanted. They did. They forgot they'd ever been told no. And maybe a small thing like that is how change starts. The day unspooled in ordinary. Ordinary has saved me more times than I can count. I folded laundry and tucked Emily's sweater on a hanger. I wiped down counters and put the nativity back together. The shepherd had come loose, and I glued him gently by the base. I took out the notices Tom had filed neatly for the company, insurance, license renewals, and made a note to call Mr. Kaplan about the bank signers. I sat with a tin of ornaments and wrapped them back in tissue that crackled like fire. I stood at the window and watched flakes begin to drift sideways, hushed. I stirred a pot of chicken noodle on the stove and knew, the way someone knows the shape of a family recipe without looking, that this was the right time to call our foreman, Mike, and tell him how we'd structure the holiday pay. Same as always, I said. Even if the jobs are thin next week, I'll make sure Christmas isn't. He cleared his throat and said his mother asks for me at Mass sometimes, and I said, tell her I sit in the back because I cry too easy these days. At 3, Emily came home from work early, cheeks pink, scarf fuzzy with flakes. She stood in the hall and shook her hair like she used to when she was little. Mom, she said, And she started to cry a little, and then stopped herself because she's a mother now, and children listen for the end of tears the way they listen for the microwave ding. I took her in my arms anyway. "I am proud of you," I said. "Not for what you will do or won't do, for how you are." She sniffed, and we laughed, because when someone says something like that, you have to laugh or you'll cry all over again. "I should have said something last week when he told you the stairs were dangerous," she said. "I should have told him that if the stairs carried you up to wake me for school and down to make pot roast for 30 Christmases, they were sacred, not dangerous." "He's worried," I said. "He thinks ahead. That's not a bad thing. He just forgets the pieces in front of his feet. We'll help him see them." She nodded. "He thinks the will is a power play." "It's a fence," I said. "Your father built fences on jobs sometimes, not to keep people in, to keep danger out. People forget that when they've never fallen into a hole." Derek came home just before 5 with an armful of grocery bags and a cardboard folder under his arm. He set the food down, milk, eggs, the good bread Emily likes that tastes like a real bakery, not air, and he set the folder on the island like a proposition. "I met with someone," he said. "He doesn't waste time. She says this is unusual and that we can talk about options. Contesting will be complicated. It's written tight, but unusual things sometimes need review." He looked at me even when he addressed Emily. "There's also the matter of optics, Em. If we move, people will ask questions." I almost smiled. I have come to dislike the word optics. It makes truth into a photograph, angles and light, and the possibility of cropping. "There will be no optics if there's no drama," I said. "There will be no drama if there is kindness." I lifted the bread, unwrapped it, and handed him the first slice. "Eat, then talk." We ate. We fed the children soup and grilled cheese. We talked about Sophie's book, about Liam learning to tie his shoes and the way he insists the loops are bunny ears, even though he really has no interest in rabbits and a great interest in trucks. We smoothed the evening like a sheet, and then, after the kids were in pajamas and Derek had stacked plates in the dishwasher with the neatness of a man who likes systems, we stood in the living room. "Our plan," he said, and it would have been easy to bristle at the possessive, but I took a breath. "Tell me yours too," I said. "We'll see where they overlap." He wanted a schedule. He wanted a guarantee we would not evict him, a word I refused to use about family. If he complied with a clause he found humiliating. I explained the clause was not to demean, but to delineate. I told him he would be welcome so long as he spoke to me with the respect he expects for himself, that he would not rearrange my home without asking, that the company was my decision now, and that if he had ideas, he could pitch them like a man in a meeting and not plant them like flags. I told him plainly that he could not tell me I didn't belong in my own kitchen, my own hall, my own house, that he would not, again, remove my things without my consent, and that if that felt like too heavy a coat for him to wear, he was free to set it down. He looked at Emily, and Emily looked at him, and then she looked at me. "We can try," she said. Derek nodded, slowly. For some people, nodding itself is new. I do not fool myself. The months ahead will not be easy. There are 30 days built into the will, because we new habits don't remodel themselves overnight. There is a part of Derek that believes he has been wronged because power rearranged while he was looking somewhere else. There is a part of me that wants to slam doors I have kept open all my life. I remind myself that my mother pinned St. Christopher on my coat, not because she wanted me to never leave home, but because she wanted me to travel well. I tuck the medal into my palm and let his round edges press into me and say, "Steady." After they went upstairs, after teeth and bedtime stories and the thump of a roller skate being pushed under a bed, after I put the kettle on and went to the front room and turned off the main lamp so the tree could do the work of light, I sat on Tom's old chair. He carved his initials on the underside once, the year the kids bought it for him for Father's Day, and I sometimes feel them through the cushion like a knock. The star at the top of the tree hung a little crooked, and I left it that way. Perfection is often achieved in the last inch of imperfection. The snow outside had finally committed to a steady fall, the kind that makes the streetlights fuzz. Far away, a plow scraped along, and I thought of our men. How many Christmas Eves they've been out so someone else's babies could wake up warm. I thought of Mr. Kaplan's hat dusted with snow, and the way he says my name like a contract that holds. I thought of Derek, who loves my daughter and my grandchildren, and who wants a life with straight lines and easy corners. I thought of young Derek before I knew him, standing awkward at his own mother's sink, watching her be told she talks too loud or too much by a man who thought the volume was the problem when it was the music. I wondered if anyone had ever told him he could sing, and that if he did, he didn't have to drown out the people who knew the harmony. The doorbell rang. Not like danger, like mail. I opened it and found a small box on the porch, wet around the edges from snow. Inside was a bag of kiffles from Mrs. Russo with a note in her old lady hand that said, "For company, for the long nights," and a smiley face she must have drawn with a real pen that squeaked a little. I laughed and cried and ate one, powdered sugar dusting my sweater, and thought how the best parts of New Jersey are small and sweet and arrive when you need to refill your plate. The big conflict doesn't always arrive in a single speech. Sometimes it's a calendar that ticks. Derek will call his lawyer, I will call mine. He will test the edges of the rule like a child pushes on a fence with his palm to see if it wobbles. I will invite him to Sunday dinner and hand him the carving knife and tell him he has hands capable of tenderness. He will say the word optics again. I will ask him to say respect and mean it. He will disagree with me about how to run a company he still does not entirely understand. I will ask him to ride along one more time. If he says yes, I will pack a thermos and a sandwich and my old knit hat, and I will watch him watch the world at 3 a.m. when your breath looks like a prayer, and realize that homes are built out of the kind of work that leaves your hands warm even in winter. Tonight, I take my St. Christopher and hang him on the nail by the back door, where I keep the keys on that old blue ring. I hold both, and I kiss my fingers, and I touch the wood, old varnish, and a new scratch where a box once grazed it. I tell the house good night out loud, the way some people talk to their dogs or their God or the moon. You thank what has held you. You own what you have earned. Own, not as in property, but as in responsibility. You make soup. You look your son-in-law in the eye, and you say, "You belong here if you belong here." You set a place. You pass the gravy. You pick up a napkin that fell on the floor and put it on the chair. You wait for the heat to come on, and when it does, you recognize the sound and smile. It sounds like us. It sounds like I do belong here after all, and like anybody who wants to is welcome to belong beside me, in this good house, in this new winter. In this long life that keeps teaching me that strong doesn't look like loud until loud leaves the room and you realize strength is the thing that kept you seated with your back straight when someone told you to stand and walk out. I set another log on the fire. I straighten the crooked star 1 soft inch. I breathe in cinnamon and pine, and I let the quiet answer for once, because sometimes the only thing that needs to be said is what a room hears when a woman who has not been moved decides to stay. No começo, você pensa que vai engolir tudo para não estragar o Natal. Que cada pequena humilhação é uma migalha na toalha. Dá para varrer depois, na solidão da cozinha, enquanto você esfrega o cheiro de canela da frigideira e pensa que, se aguentar mais uma noite, amanhã talvez acorde paz. No entanto, 30, 40 anos de silêncio, de fazer o jantar, esconder o próprio choro lavando o arroz na pia da frente, segurar a língua até doer, criam um tipo de firmeza que não recua fácil, ainda que pareça maleável. Eu me sento à mesa, as mãos que já ensinaram Emile a amarrar cadarço fechadas sob a bainha do avental, apertando no escuro o medalhão de São Cristóvão e prometendo a mim mesma que não vou devolver a palavra enquanto ela não vier pura. Derek não entende o tempo. Imagina que cada riso abafado é concessão, cada recuo é derrota. Não sabe que para quem já acompanhou homem em quimioterapia, que já esperou o resultado de biópsia segurando a alça de uma bolsa de supermercado, muito pouco no mundo tem peso real de medo. Ele me encara como se o tapete debaixo de seus pés fosse dele, como se minha presença ofuscasse sua imagem ideal de lar suburbano. Linhas limpas, vãos livres, tudo pronto para foto de revista. Mas eu vejo, ali sob a pele, o menino assustado que aprendeu cedo a competir por afeto, e imagino que nunca tenha tido uma avó que lhe servisse sopa meia-noite, nem mãe que lhe ensinasse que há maneiras e maneiras de dizer que não gosta de alguém. A injustiça picota a gente em várias manhãs pequenas. Quando ele chama minha louça de velharia, ri da mantinha tricotada que cobre o sofá, refaz meu café dizendo que ficou forte demais para os costumes atuais. Quando sugere diante dos netos que a vovó está confusa, que deve ser difícil manter tudo em ordem nessa idade. Cada movimento é um aviso em voz baixa de que eu sou hóspede, não fundadora. O lar não se veste de lembrança, precisa acompanhar o tempo. Foi o que ouvi quando pendurei de novo as fotos de Emily pequena, quando substituiu a colcha do quarto por uma edredom cinza de loja cara, quando quis jogar fora caixas de receitas manchadas de gordura, desdenhando o cartãozinho onde Tom escreveu menos açúcar, mais nós, à mão, na véspera de um Natal em que só tínhamos dinheiro para um prato principal, e ainda assim rimos ao dividir o doce. Por semanas, durante novembro e dezembro, engoli em seco. Fiquei quieta quando Emily suspirava exausta entre o marido e a rotina de trabalho, quando Sophie e Liam me pediam para desenhar flocos de neve de papel e Derek recolhia dizendo que fazia bagunça. Não protestei, não reclamei sequer quando ele cancelou minha inscrição no coral da paróquia, alegando que era tempo de encontrar novas atividades, como se quem canta desafinado cantasse para plateias, não para acalmar o coração. O objeto que decidi nunca tirar da bolsa, nem mesmo nos jantares mais difíceis, foi o medalhão de São Cristóvão. É pequeno, prateado, com o rosto já quase apagado de tanto andar junto comigo. Minha mãe dizia que quem carrega São Cristóvão carrega consigo o direito de ir, mas principalmente de ficar em pé, onde for correto. Segure firme quando sentir medo, ela repetia. E foi assim que, com meus dedos em oração contida, sobrevivi à primeira tarde em que Derek reclamou abertamente, diante de toda a família, que alguém precisava modernizar hábitos. Não rebati. Senti apenas, como um frio que começa nas costas e desce pelas pernas, que talvez o tempo de esperar a tormenta passar estivesse acabando. Mas o pior não foi isso. Foi perceber que Emily, pela primeira vez, se deixava convencer que o meio-termo era segurança. Mamãe, ele só está tentando ajudar. Mudar faz bem. Ela rejeitou o abraço rápido que dei, voltando para o computador, os olhos cheios de listas e ausências. Era como ver uma porta fechar devagar, entre mãe e filha, e do outro lado, a mão de um homem decidido a ser dono do tempo, da casa, dos laços. Minha decisão nasceu uma tarde azul, quando reorganizaram os móveis da sala sem me consultar. Meu porta-retratos de casamento sumido da estante, minha colcha de retalhos remanejada para o fundo do armário. Senti, com exatidão, o que meu Tom queria evitar. Que a história construída a mãos calejadas virasse ruído diante da autoridade de quem interpreta gentileza como concessão. Foi então que desci ao porão, respirei o cheiro de aquecedor antigo e folheei as instruções da companhia. Pastas que guardamos juntos, numeradas e classificadas. Entre elas, a carta escrita a próprio punho, testemunhada por Mr. Kaplan, assegurando que nenhuma peça desse lar mudaria de dono sem meu aval enquanto eu tivesse vida e vontade. Senti o peso do medalhão e decidi. Basta. O plano não era confronto público, mas justiça limpa, no idioma que Derek fala. Papel registrado, assinatura reconhecida, regra explícita. Pedi a Mr. Kaplan que viesse numa noite de Natal, não por gosto de espetáculo, mas pelo simbolismo. Natal é reunião de promessas e também de cobranças silenciosas. Precisei do altar da tradição para afirmar, sem escândalo, que não sou visita, que não aceito ser tratada como mobiliário descartável. No jantar, como imaginei, acúmulo ferveu em silêncio. Derek, acossado, Emily partida entre culpa e medo, os netos confusos com atenção, minha mão sempre pousando no medalhão no colo. Quando ele disse, perto demais, voz escorrendo desdém. You don't belong here. Lembrei das noites de inverno, estendendo o cobertor sobre Tom, das manhãs em que o cheiro de café e óleo queimado me fazia acreditar que o mundo inteiro era nosso, bastava caber num intervalo doce de sopa e pão quente. Senti vontade de explodir, mas respirei fundo, porque quem carrega a história do lar carrega a última palavra, ainda que demore a pronunciá-la. O estopim foi o toque da campainha, o baque do gravador, o papel desdobrado e o silêncio que se seguiu à voz de Mr. Kaplan afirmando: Margaret é titular. Toda ofensa aqui destitui direito de permanência. Foi como assistir a casa voltar a ser casa. Meus quadros, minhas receitas, minha voz. Derek tentou sorrir, acusar irregularidade, buscar apoio em Emily. Mas Emily, enfim, ergueu a cabeça. Olhou para mim não mais como filha dividida, mas como mulher que redescobre em si a coragem herdada e deixou seu apoio visível na voz embargada. Ele estava lúcido, ele sabia o que fazia. Nunca ouvi minha filha tão nítida. O medalhão queimava na palma da mão, símbolo do tanto que já percorri. Chorei por dentro. Chorei pelo respeito finalmente conquistado com o único idioma que Derek parecia entender. Consequências claras. Fui naquela noite o próprio inverno em chamas, não por dar respostas duras, mas por receber em silêncio o eco da dignidade finalmente posta à mesa. Meu plano não termina aqui. Depois da leitura, ouvi Derek ao telefone. Voz baixa, consulta jurídica, ansiedade misturada com orgulho ferido. Contestaremos, disse ao advogado. Nada como a fé de quem nunca varreu o chão de fábrica para crer que tudo se ajeita com papéis. Não falei mais nada. Apenas caminhei com passos firmes, guardando o medalhão na prateleira ao lado das chaves azuis da Donnelly Heating, tocando no velho corrimão como quem sela uma promessa. Emily se aproximou sutil, sem barulho. Mamãe, por que você não falou antes? E eu expliquei. Não para absolvê-la, mas para dividir o fardo, que há silêncios sagrados, que você só grita quando a esperança de ser ouvida por meios bonitos se esgota. Que agora, com as linhas traçadas, ela podia escolher ser ponte ou muralha. Vi, finalmente, compreensão nos seus olhos. Demos as mãos sobre a bancada da cozinha, a mais antiga das alianças. A generosidade é, sim, uma escolha violenta às vezes. Quando Derek voltou do banho naquele dia, não tentou mais sorrir. Ofereceu um bom dia educado, aceitou o café que servia sem açúcar, deixou as crianças usarem as coroas de papel. O clima doerava, não de raiva, mas de reconhecimento de uma força que ele nunca havia previsto. Não se enfrenta a história longa com argumentos frágeis. Ele estudaria brechas, buscaria conselhos, mas já sabia. O imóvel e a empresa são meus. Só há casa para quem compreende que respeito não é favor. Meu plano agora é de avó que arma trincheira com biscoitos e recados gentis. Se Derek quiser aprender, há espaço na mesa. Se preferir resistir, saberá a cada olhar firme que o recinto é lugar de raízes e não de conquista. Minha memória é o objeto símbolo, medalhão gasto, casa arrumada, retrato do casamento reencostado na prateleira, brilho de luz amarela refletida na porcelana herdada. E se, e é provável que sim, vierem debates, tentativas de negociar, já sei o que fazer. Mostrarei o contrato. Lembrai-o do Natal em que Tom lavou louça para economizar energia, do dia em que a empresa quase quebrou e decidi vender as pérolas da minha mãe, do ano em que aprendi que manter segredo é às vezes o mesmo que garantir futuro. Serei justa, mas intransigente. A regra é uma. Quem não sabe tratar, não partilha lareira nem teto. No auge do clímax, numa noite gelada, talvez ano novo, talvez o primeiro domingo de janeiro, Derek tentará mais uma ofensiva. Um discurso sobre justiça, modernidade, direito à felicidade. Sentará na poltrona com um envelope novo, dizendo que talvez seja melhor nós mesmos procurarmos outra casa, não para evitar confronto, mas para sermos felizes. Emily hesitará, os netos perturbados. Olharei de frente, falarei baixo, mas inteiro. Eu preferia não precisar de papel, preferia não precisar levantar a voz, mas escolhi me proteger. E dentro dessas paredes, palavra só é calor se vier com respeito. Essa casa é lareira, não tribunal. Se quiserem permanecer, há espaço. Se preferirem ir, eu preparo a cesta do lanche da viagem. Sim, até partilha pode ser gesto de amor. Nesse instante saberei, no silêncio sólido que ocupará a sala, que ganhei. Não do Derek, não do mundo. Ganhei de uma vida inteira de aprender a me calar, de aceitar o menos para evitar conflito. Ganhei por recusar que minha história virasse mobília de brechó moderno. Serei lembrança viva, não espectro. E no fundo, é isso que Tom quis, que eu fosse guardiã do lar, da dignidade, da tradição. Essa tradição que é, no fim, empatia. Servir pão fresco, defender quem precisa, estender o braço para quem se perdeu do caminho. No dia seguinte, não haverá júbilo. Sairei para buscar leite na esquina, cumprimentarei Mrs. Russo, carregarei pães de kifle no bolso do casaco. Emily virá me abraçar, talvez deixe um bilhete simples. Obrigada por ensinar. Os netos, olhos vívidos, pedirão para montar bonecos de neve no pátio. Derek pensará, com a melancolia de quem finalmente entende a derrota, que respeito não se extrai por imposição. Vou pendurar São Cristóvão na porta, arrumar o tapete de entrada e deixar a lasanha pronta. Como sempre. Família é assim. Sangra em silêncio, cura dentro do cheiro de molho. O lar venceu. Não o concreto, mas o invisível. Aqui pertenço. E quem amar essa pertença é sempre bem-vindo. O que seguiu depois do clímax foi de início um silêncio denso, desses que se sentam no meio da casa e só deixam o relógio da parede avançar, lento. Derek mudou, não de maneira espetacular, nem no calor de algum pedido de perdão dramático, mas num tipo de desalento que só sente quem perde, de uma vez, o comando do próprio roteiro. Evitava meus olhos no café da manhã. Apoiava a mão sobre a bancada, pensando nas palavras certas, sem encontrá-las. Já não recolhia as coroas de papel, nem comentava sobre receitas antigas esquecidas no caderno. Tampouco dispensou sua postura aguçada, mas o tom mudou. Passou a pedir, por favor, ao sugerir alguma mudança. Perguntava antes de mexer no arranjo do centro da mesa e deixou os quadros finalmente nos seus lugares na estante da sala. Emily, por sua vez, trocou o compasso hesitante por um caminhar mais livre, leve. Começou a me chamar para tomar café no fim do expediente. Deixou bilhetes na porta da geladeira, como fazia quem deseja restaurar janelas, ainda que algumas estejam lascadas de tempestades passadas. Na primeira semana após revelação da vontade do Tom, nos olhamos com novo respeito, sem palavras demais. Na segunda, já voltávamos a compartilhar fatias de bolo junto ao fogão, onde a luz do fim de tarde batia morna no azulejo, lembrando as manhãs antigas, cheias de pão e promessa. Chegaram as reuniões com advogados, como Derek havia ensaiado, reuniões curtas, secas. Ele tentava encaixar argumentos de justiça e modernidade, mas a letra da lei era clara como água, e mais que isso, sabia-se que não era só papel que estava em jogo. Era a linha invisível do afeto, o lastro do sangue que dá fôlego à permanência. Derek percebeu, talvez pela primeira vez, que qualquer conquista que não começa pelo respeito termina à porta, com a mala pronta. Emily, presente e tranquila, segurava minha mão ao final dessas conversas, resgatando laços numa delicadeza de gesto que só mães e filhas partilham, quando se perdoam sem precisar dizer desculpa. Os netos voltaram a espalhar desenhos pela casa sem medo. Sophie me pediu para ensinar a receita dos biscoitos de noz, e Liam sentou no chão comigo para construir um forte de almofada, usando as mesmas mantas que, semanas antes, Derek considerava coisas velhas demais para a vista. A casa pulsava de novo, não com a falsa harmonia das fotos de revista, mas com aquela alegria caótica que existe quando cada voz ocupa seu espaço e ninguém se esconde atrás de silêncios carregados. Derek levou um tempo para se ajustar. Os hábitos antigos, às vezes, rangem como as tábuas do assoalho do corredor de cima. Mas um fim de semana, quando Emily saiu para ajudar uma vizinha, Ele apareceu na cozinha e, sem rodeios, me encontrou arrumando o medalhão de São Cristóvão na prateleira. "Sabe, Margaret", disse olhando para o chão, "não entendi por que precisou ser assim, mas nunca vi Emily tão firme." Esperei. Ele prosseguiu, ciente de que não era pedido de desculpas, mas tremia ali um pedido de passagem. "Eu não cresci com muito espaço para a tradição. Por aqui, tudo era negociável, descartável. Eu não compreendia esse apego. Agora vejo que, sem dar raiz a quem veio antes, a gente sempre fica tentando plantar algo no vazio." Lhe ofereci um café quente, como fizera centenas de vezes, e vi que o espaço de convivência estava pouco a pouco sendo reconstituído não pela força do papel, mas pela força nova da escolha. Nos domingos seguintes, Emily retomou a prática de pendurar flocos de neve recortados pelas crianças na janela, e eu vi, por trás da vidraça, o rastro suave do inverno tecendo silêncio na calçada. Ao final do dia, a mesa de jantar ficou cheia de pão caseiro, lasanha, salada fresca, comida de abraço, comida de raiz. Derek participava das conversas sobre o negócio, mas aos poucos trocou as declarações de "temos que modernizar tudo" pelo silêncio atento de quem aprende sobre gambiarras de aquecedor, sobre por que a caldeira antiga da senhora Rodrigues só dá defeito em noite de geada. Eu convidei-o a conhecer a empresa nos bastidores. Deixei que acompanhasse Mike numa manhã de janeiro, uma ronda nos prédios da vizinhança, para entender o cheiro de óleo queimado, o calor que salva do frio. Ele voltou de touca e bochechas vermelhas, com menos certezas e um respeito novo pelo trabalho invisível. "É mais pesado do que falei", admitiu uma noite, limpando as botas na entrada. Emily me abraçou, num desses instantes que constroem pontes sobre abismo. "É diferente agora, mãe. Acho que ele está ouvindo o que sempre escutou, mas só agora compreendeu." E eu sorri, reconhecendo nela o traço do tom, quando a palavra encontra sentido depois da tempestade. Eram dias simples, que juntos costuravam o reconhecimento. Preparar o bolo do aniversário de Sophie, ver Liam correr de meia no corredor, ajudar a arrumar os cartões da empresa, enquanto Emily ria dos nomes errados grafados à mão. Tudo era rotina, mas naquele lar reinventado, rotina era milagre. O medo da ruptura diminuiu. A insegurança cedeu lugar à paz morna de quem sabe que a casa não é feita de paredes, mas de memórias cuidadosamente defendidas. Ainda vieram algumas conversas difíceis. Jantares um pouco ríspidos, discussões sobre pequenas decisões, a reforma do banheiro, o armário novo da cozinha. Mas era diferente. Agora, minhas opiniões tinham peso de alicerce e já não eram toleradas por obrigação, e sim consideradas por direito. Derek aprendeu, dolorosamente sim, mas aprendeu que há formas de pertencer que só surgem quando se aceita que não se é dono, mas hóspede da história. Ele reaprendeu o valor do pedido e da gentileza, viu nos olhos dos filhos pequenos uma alegria que brota sempre que a casa está inteira, e ninguém precisa abaixar a cabeça. Meu maior presente, porém, foi restabelecer a parceria com Emily. Voltamos a dividir ideias para a empresa, planejar juntos os próximos passos, partilhar memórias e segredos antigos. Aquela vergonha silenciosa entre mãe e filha, antes instalada no vão entre as escadas, deu lugar a trocas leves. Chás partilhados no fim da noite, receitas antigas redescobertas, até as lágrimas, se apareceram, vieram como chuva mansa depois de verão forte, só para nutrir o chão. No fim de janeiro, numa noite em que a lareira estalava e o céu estava limpo de neve, Emily me entregou de volta o álbum de fotos do casamento, delicadamente limpo e com uma margarida de tecido presa na capa. Para lembrar do que permanece, mãe. Foi quando compreendi de fato o tamanho do percurso. Aquele objeto símbolo, São Cristóvão, que me acompanhou no bolso por tantos anos, agora pendurado com serenidade ao lado das chaves azuis, era testemunha de que nunca precisei gritar para existir inteira. Bastou permanecer. Família não se impõe, se cultiva, dia após dia, entre o sim do café quente, o não dito com respeito, o recomeço silencioso de cada manhã. Aprendi que tradição não é peso antigo amarrando a gente ao passado, mas raiz nutrindo o tronco para o braço da criança subir mais alto. E aprendi que respeito não se exige, se inspira. Derek ficou sim, porque escolheu aprender a pertencer. Emily permaneceu, porque decidiu costurar o tempo com fios de delicadeza e firmeza. Os netos cresceram sabendo, e é só isso que desejo, que existe lugar seguro no mundo. O lar de quem conhece e honra as histórias que vieram antes. A cada novo inverno, repito o gesto de minha mãe. Esfrego o medalhão de São Cristóvão entre os dedos, olho para as chaves da Donnelly Heating e sussurro gratidão à vida que se impõe não na força, mas na coragem tranquila de quem não desiste de pertencer, mesmo que digam que não é mais sua hora. No Natal seguinte, pendurei a estrela torta bem no alto da árvore e deixei assim, aceitando que beleza real é sempre um pouco assimétrica, testemunha das mãos que já seguraram o medo e o transformaram em abrigo. E é com esse coração, marcado por lutas mansas e reconciliações profundas, que encerro este fio da minha vida. Pertencimento é conquistar, dia após dia, o direito de ser inteira sem precisar sobrepor ninguém. E se minha história te tocou, peço que deixe seu comentário, compartilhe sua lembrança e se inscreva neste canal. Porque lares verdadeiros se multiplicam quando histórias são contadas e respeito é praticado, dentro de cada casa, a partir do seu próprio silêncio corajoso. No final das contas, permanecer é o mais revolucionário dos atos, e nunca é tarde para deitar raízes, arrumar a mesa outra vez e acender uma última luz para quem ainda procura caminho.